A woman who's at the forefront of this is a woman named Farmanfarmaian, and yes, I think I got her last name right. And she was a VP at Singularity University. She's the co-founder of an organ preservation alliance. She's also done tissue engineering. So this woman is just kind of at the forefront of a lot of this stuff. And she recently wrote a book that I think she's going to tell you guys about called The Patient as CEO. So please welcome her out. I'm excited to hear what's going on. Thank you.
So hi everyone, thanks so much for coming out. I'm really excited to be back here in Stockholm. In fact, right now I'm working for Invicta Medical, and it is a sleep apnea medical device company. And we recently opened up an office right here in Stockholm, so I'm very excited to spend more time. We've got one of our main investors in the audience today, Richard Lexell. Raise your hand if you can see him. And my other main investor on the company is Peter Thiel, who apparently couldn't make it today. I don't know why. So let me give you a little bit background on me. I am a serial entrepreneur, worked on 12 or 13 early stage startup companies, all in cutting edge medical technology and biotech, from telemedicine to genetic sequencing to cryobiology and tissue engineering. Now, the reason I decided to become an entrepreneur is because as a teenager, I was misdiagnosed and ended up resulting in 43 hospitalizations and 6 major surgeries. Now, when you're facing surgery, right, and especially when you're a kid, because I was only a teenager at the time, I went to every single hospital out there on the East Coast looking for the very best doctors out there. But none of my doctors ever looked at me and said, you know what, Robin? Let's hold off on these surgeries because you're so young. Technology is moving so quickly, it can provide better solutions in the near future. No one ever looked at me and said, you know what, Robin? Technology is hope. But technology is hope. In fact, had digital health IT and just the sheer amount of information we now have access to as patients existed when I was a teenager, I probably wouldn't have lost 3 organs. At the age of 26, this is 7 years after they had taken out my entire large intestine, my doctors were telling me I was cured, but I wasn't. And I was in extreme pain. So they were like, oh, well, it's probably just because you had so much abdominal surgery. They decided to treat it with 80 milligrams a day of methadone. Now, this is a gigantic dose of opiates for anyone, right? And they told me that the next step would be to surgically implant a morphine pump into my spine. I was 26 years old, and they were telling me essentially I was going to be a shut-in for the rest of my life. So, went home that night, fired my entire healthcare team. Every single one of them. Rebuilt it with healthcare professionals that worked with me as a colleague and a peer and allowed me to be the key decision maker. Well, ended up getting diagnosed correctly, off all of the opiates, put on a medication called Remicade, and within 24 hours of that first IV infusion, I went to remission. Literally overnight. 13-year misdiagnosis. So that's what I'm up here to talk to you about, how the convergence now of all these really cool exponential technologies are really empowering the patient to be a key decision maker. Now, when I'm talking about exponential technology, of course, I'm talking about all the sexy things: robotics, artificial intelligence, sensors, 3D printing, even being able to utilize the power of the crowd. Now, I'm doing a second talk later on today on the health stage that I will just cover artificial intelligence and 3D printing. So today I'll cover a couple of different ones here. Let's start out with a scenario. What it's like to be a patient today and in the near future. Let me give you one example of something called a point-of-care diagnostic device. What that means is a diagnostic device comes to the patient versus the patient having to go to the traditional setting, like a hospital or a clinic. Right now, Biogen, it's one of the world's biggest pharmas out there. They have actually invented a $200 PET scan that's portable and costs pennies to actually use. Now, a traditional PET scan, $2 million machine, only available in hospitals, literally costs thousands, right? And we are seeing more and more of these things go from $2 million to a couple $100 literally overnight. That one's in prototype form. Let me give you an example of one that's on the market with approval. A LiveCore EKG monitor. right? What this is a point-of-care diagnostic that fits on your iPhone case or your Apple iWatch, takes clinical-grade EKG data, and you can do this in the home, right? So what I can do is now as a patient, take my EKG data, send the data up to the cloud, where it's going to be analyzed by artificial intelligence. And if there is a problem, I'll be alerted, as will my healthcare professional, if I choose that to happen. Now, then I no longer need to actually go to a hospital, though, to see my healthcare professional. Telepresent medicine is absolutely on the exponential trend. In the United States, Kaiser Permanente, it's one of the the country's largest managed care organizations. They're expected to have more than 50% of all of their visits by telemedicine by 2018, right? Veterans Administration, again, the largest healthcare system in the United States, also is going this route. And then what about potentially getting my medication delivered by drone? We're seeing a lot of movement in the drone industry. In fact, it is exploding. A company called Zipline, $19 million of funding out of California. Well, they've gone into Rwanda, one of the world's poorest countries, right? And they are doing the very first completely nationalized drone delivery system specifically for healthcare. They've already launched, pun intended, and they are delivering things like blood for transfusions. We're seeing drones being utilized in other areas of medicine. This is a flying defibrillator. If you can get to a heart attack victim in under 60 seconds, it will increase survival rates from 8% to 80% for patients with heart attacks, right? And flying cars, well, we essentially have them now. This is a one-person ambulance drone. Can carry 265 pounds and fly for 23 minutes. This came out at CES last year. They are already in talks with a company called Lung Biotechnologies to do 1,000 units for transplants. This company in particular is out of China. So, drone industry, as I mentioned, is exploding. In fact, these numbers so shocked me when I read them in a PwC report. I called a friend of mine up who's a CTO at Cisco. She's like, oh yeah, absolutely. This year, the global market, $2 billion. By 2020, it's going to be a $127 billion market. Massive growth, right? And we're seeing a huge amount of venture capital being invested, and this is not niche VCs. These are mainstream VCs putting in about $2 billion already. All right, so we are entering a perfect storm right now of technological advancements, really enabling what I like to call the era of the patient. So let's start out with the medical science. Genetic sequencing, we all know about this, right? Not only is this on the exponential trend, but it is dramatically outperforming Moore's Law. 2001 cost $100 million to sequence a genome. This year, it fell to under $1,000. That is the inflection point. Experts the world over agreed would make a difference. That means over the next 10 years, we're going to see maybe the dollar, if not the penny genome. And we are going to be able to afford to sequence the world, right? Talk about a massive amount of big data. We'll be doing things like predictive analytics, early onset diagnostics, and even a leap towards stage 0 medicine. Now, I want to raise a hands in the room. How many people have heard of the microbiome? Right? Okay. A couple people. What this is, these are the colonies of bacteria that live in and on our bodies. Symbiotic relationship, we need them, absolutely, and they need us, right? In fact, we are less than 50% human cells. We haven't been taking this into account in medicine all these years. Well, genetic sequencing technology is helping catalyze this. The US government recently launched a $400 million initiative around sequencing the microbiome. Let me give you a couple of examples. I have Crohn's disease. Imagine I bank my microbiome when I'm feeling well to get a transplant back when I'm not. Or what about this scenario? What if some of these diseases that we thought were genetic, in fact, turn out to be infectious through the microbiome? Yeah, right? Well, we are already treating something called C. diff. It's a very difficult to treat infection with fecal transplants. Way of the world, right? All right, so let's talk a little bit about software. As I mentioned, I'll talk about AI later on today. So I want to give you a very brief overview of VR because I noticed that we're going to be covering it a lot today. Well, right now, you can imagine things like gaming or entertainment, right? Those are the easy things. Recreational experiences like skydiving or going along the Great Wall of China. But we're seeing a lot of really cool things in VR popping up over the next couple of years, from architecture to driving a test car, right? Like, why would you do any shopping when you can actually do it by VR or AR? And lots of different clothing companies and makeup companies are already launching apps for this. But in the medical space, it is really exciting. So this is me playing around with a company called Deepstream. It's specifically for pain control. And let me tell you, so if you've tried Google Cardboard versus like the Vive or the Oculus Rift, they're not even comparable technologies. When you start to look at these $800 headsets, it is a game changer. So the day I did this, I was in pretty significant pain, and I didn't take any pain meds. Turned off my pain like literally instantly. It's an amazing, amazing opportunity in that space. This particular one retails for about $2,300, and they're being sold to hospitals. We're seeing it also being used in things like PTSD, anxiety, depression, and even things like stroke and paralysis rehabilitation. Patients who have had no feeling from the waist down, and they've tried things like stem cell treatments or surgery, all of a sudden are getting some slight movement back by retraining their brain with virtual reality. And we're going to start to see virtual reality go social, right? This is a next generation Second Life called High Fidelity. We'll start to do things like meetings, education, even our social events by VR. So what should we think about with this? Well, right now, it's going to be about its first $1 billion industry, pushed mostly through military use. That's for training exercise, disaster response. But right now, we're also seeing massive capital invested, $2.3 billion out of mainstream VCs this year alone. So experts are saying this might actually be a $120 billion industry over the next few years. What's going to catalyze that? Probably Apple. Rumor has it, by 2018, they are going to come out with their 10th anniversary iPhone, which is going to be AR and VR as a main focus. All right, so let's talk a little bit about hardware. Sensors, of course, are becoming ubiquitous. You've heard of the phrase the Internet of Things, right? Well, I'm thinking about an Internet of You. Right now, we are experiencing a paradigm shift. Everything is going digital. In fact, by 2019, it is expected that the sensor market is going to be a $50 billion industry. Massive opportunity space for entrepreneurs, right? Now, the really cool thing about technology is it makes things seamless. I don't do things like wear wearable technology because I have to think about it, or I have to match it with my outfit, or I have to charge it. But the really cool thing about technology is it makes things seamless. We're seeing this go in many ways past the Fitbit. Biometric smartwear, of course, it's gone mainstream with Polo Ralph Lauren, but we're seeing companies get into the clinical space. Things like 15-lead EKG compression shirts and socks that measure gait for neurodegenerative diseases. Other examples, MC10 partnered with L'Oreal Cosmetics. L'Oreal happens to be putting a huge amount of their R&D budget into things like tissue engineering for skin, and this. This is a sensor tattoo that measures UV radiation. Of course, we're seeing it in contact lenses for glaucoma progression, glucose monitoring. This is Abbott launched this in Europe this last October, I believe it was, about a year ago. And it does continuous glucose monitoring using a little filament that goes into the interstitial fluid, right? But this is a game changer with diabetes. And we're seeing an entirely new category called ingestibles. This particular project is out of MIT. It is a vital sign pill. Literally, all you do is swallow it, and you get continuous vital signs. There's another company called Proteus. Proteus has a sensor on the market already for compounded medication. What it does is it goes on the medicine, and the patient swallows it, and it tracks the fact that it's actually in your body, right? Really cool. And let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. So just like with banking and education, infrastructure and content are separating. You are no longer constrained to a physical venue just to receive healthcare. In fact, you are not constrained to a physical venue to do just about anything from your job to your relationship, right? You can do this all virtually. Now, the big deal for patients is I was a shut-in pretty much for 2 years. I was way too sick to leave the house, have an actual job. But now, all of a sudden, patients that are as sick as I used to be about 20 years ago absolutely can have a job from home. Big deal. And this is going to explode over the next few years. It is expected that an additional 3 billion people with a B will be coming online. And lots of companies are putting billions of dollars into making sure this happens. Companies like Internet.org, it's Mark Zuckerberg's brainchild. He's partnered with like Qualcomm and Nokia, and they are trying to make existing infrastructure 100 times less expensive, as well as use drone technology to get internet to people who don't necessarily have it right now. OneWeb partnered with Virgin Galactic. Elon Musk has a similar company. They're doing it with satellites in the air. X is originally out of Google. And what they're doing is gigantic hot air balloons, right, that circumnavigate the globe. And they've actually already launched in Sri Lanka. And all of this is really leading to something called the power of the crowd. So we're all familiar with things like Airbnb and Uber. What these are platforms utilized and populated by the power of the crowd. Now, in things like medicine, this is an incredibly exciting area. We can start to use the power of the crowd for things like patient-driven research platforms, right? Or peer-to-peer social networks. So give you some examples. Patients like me and smart patients, any disease that you have, you can go onto these platforms and find your peers, right? Find the community. And patients have a vested interest in how they feel. So you go to a doctor once or twice a year, right, for about 10 minutes. Once you're out that door, they're not going to think about you again. They can't afford to. But those patients, on smart patients and patients like me, absolutely, they are thinking about their disease 24/7. They're coming up with treatment plans. They are finding research. They're traveling the world. And it's all being dumped in information in these kinds of things. So you'll be able to find them. Another really interesting one is chronology. Chronology is peer-to-peer social networking for patients specifically with IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. Now, what started out as a social networking site has morphed into a patient-driven research platform because they were finding insights not found in the literature and that doctors didn't know about. One example is specifically patients with Crohn's and colitis. They can't tolerate beer. You're not going to find that anywhere. And all of this technology is really raising the bar on the interaction between the patient and the physician. So if you think back to the title of my talk, The Patient as the CEO, just like the CEO of a corporation, you're not an expert in all the different divisions, right? CEO doesn't know how to do marketing or finance, legal, engineering. They hire the best experts, right? So as a CEO of a corporation, you hire your best experts, they do their job, report back to you, and together, as a team, you decided on direction for the company to go into. But as CEO, you are the one who is ultimately responsible that that vision is carried out and that the company overall is successful. So I ask you, why should being a patient be any different? Right? So I want to leave you with this thought. Now that you're the CEO of your own healthcare team, and I mean every single person in this room, you are now the CEO of your own healthcare team, how are you going to start to change your behavior today? Thank you.